let's get into the parsha because we only have a few minutes left, and I apologize. Okay, Parshas Lech Lecha. We're just going to dwell. We don't have time to go into the Alshich today because our time is limited. Vayomer Hashem el Avram. Hashem, the very first pasuk, Hashem says to Avram, Lech Lecha me'artzecha u'mimoladetecha u'mibeis avicha. Go thee, or get thee from your land, from your birthplace, from the house of your father, and go to the land which I shall show you. There are a number of different things that we need to point out. The first thing I want to point out is that Rashi says that Lech Lecha, the word Lecha is the disturbing word. When God speaks to a person and gives them an instruction, he would say, Lech. If I want you to go somewhere, I say, go to that place. Lech El, go to. Why is it Lech Lecha? Go for yourself. Rashi, that's the way Rashi translates it, is Lahanasecha uletovasecha. Don't think that you're doing this on a mission for God that is purely sacrificial, where you feel that you're not going to get anything from it. You're not doing this as a servant of God. You're doing this actually to gain tremendously from it. And that is the first directive that every Jew has to feel when they are serving Hashem, that it is Lech Lecha, that every mitzvah that we do, following the command of Hashem, ultimately is beneficial to us. Now, using that as our springboard, let's take a look at the Alshich HaKadosh. He lives in the 16th century in Tzfat in Eretz Yisrael. It's a very, very holy time. It's a very, very holy place. And the Alshich has this really phenomenal commentary on the Torah, which is not studied enough, largely because it's very, very lengthy, like the commentary of the Abarbanel. But it's a very, very important commentary. And I pulled out just a few short paragraphs from a much, much longer commentary, but even this is quite lengthy. We won't have time to go into it today, but let's just look at his question. Lavo el biur hamikraot. I want to just try and be able to understand the text, he says. Nasim lev el ktsat he'arot. I want to ask a few questions. I've only allowed us to see 2 out of, I think, about a dozen questions that he asks on the first couple of psukim. He says, Halo Hema, Aleph, he says, Omro Vayomar Hashem, Kimin HaRa'oi, Yomar Tchila, Vayera Elav Hashem, V'achar Kach Ma Diber Elav, U'ma Gam Im Haita Zo Pam HaRishona, She'aya Ra'oi Yodia Chidush HaYitraot. Why is it that the Torah over here does not introduce this encounter, this monumental encounter between God and man? You know, normally it would say that God appeared to Avraham. Here we have nothing of that. We just have God just barging in on the scene and saying, Avraham, go down to the land. And it seems quite strange. It seems quite, incongruent, because there's no sort of introduction, like in contrast to last week's parsha. The Torah says, Eila told us Noach ish tzadik tamim haya b'doro, saves ha'elokim yisalech Noach. Noach was a very righteous man. He walked with God. And then, as a result, Vayomer Elokim el Noach. Right? God speaks to Noach. But here there's no introduction of who Avraham is. All we know is from last week's parsha is that he's a traveler. He's itinerant. And he leaves his homeland and he goes with his father. And he goes with his family. But there's no description of who Avraham is. There's no description of God appearing to Avraham and imbuing him with this prophetic knowledge. So that in itself is very strange. And the second question that he asks is, Milat lecha shehi miyuteret. He says, go for your sake. It seems to be superfluous. What is it doing there? So there are a couple of things that he points out. The first thing that he points out, which we're not going to go into inside, is that that Hashem wanted to make sure that Avram understood that Hashem says, I know that you may have many questions. I know that you feel that you can accomplish a tremendous amount by staying in your own land. I mean, after all, if I've chosen you to spread the word of Hashem, why wouldn't you want to spread it in a place that is your native homeland, where people know you, where you speak their language, where you're not a stranger, where you're not a foreigner? So maybe you could argue that you should stay where you are. And furthermore, Hashem says, I know that you may be thinking to yourself, how can I abandon my family and go do Hashem's bidding? Maybe don't I owe a debt of Hakaras Hatov to take care of my parents, to take care of my family. How can I leave them? And therefore Hashem has to explain to Avraham. He says, no. First of all, you've been living among the people in Ur Kasdim for a long time. Whatever influence you've been able to have, you've exhausted that. If they haven't listened to you up until now, it's nicht verhelfen. It's not going to help anymore. So let's take you to the land of Canaan, where there's a hope that I think that you're going to have more success there. And that's what Hashem wanted to reassure Avraham. And also Hashem wanted to assure Avraham that you need to leave your father's house. And there are some times that some people have reluctance to do that. You have to go in order to arrive at your destiny. Lech Lecha. You have to achieve your destiny. And a lot of times people mistake family responsibilities for their destiny. Family responsibilities are very important, but a person may have a larger destiny at hand that forces them, that requires of them to sacrifice certain familial responsibilities and commitments. Because the alternative is that we sometimes will squander our entire lifetime taking care of others and thereby not realizing the greatness of that which we are destined for. And that is all contained within Hashem's command to Avraham. You need to go. You need to go. That's the simple explanation the Al-Sheikh HaKadosh says. And then he goes further. And he says, and this is the second half of the Al-Sheikh on your page. Omnam, he says, but I want to tell you something else. Asher evchar darki b'mikrei kodesh eila halohu. I want to tell you the approach that I'm going to be taking. Ki ba Elokei olam lelamed la'Avram da'at l'man yaskil isha Yisraeli ma bein heyoto b'chutz la'aretz el heyoto be'admat hakodesh. He says the whole purpose of this whole first sentence in Parshas Lech Lecha is to instruct the Jewish person how they are ontologically, inherently different when they are in Eretz Yisrael from when they are in Chutz La'aretz. And he goes into a very detailed metaphysical discussion about the difference between the Jewish soul and the non-Jewish soul. And he talks about the difference between the land of Eretz Yisrael and all other lands. He says what you need to understand is that there is a connection that exists between the metaphysical sphere, metaphysical realm, and the physical realm. The Jewish soul is connected to a realm in heaven that is much closer to Hashem in some way, and that metaphysical realm of divine closeness has its physical counterpart in a geographic region called what we call Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, if a Jew wants to be able to come back to their source, to their root, there is supposed to be a striving within every human being to connect all the different components of their soul. Both the components of my soul that reside with me in this physical realm, and the components of my soul that are connected to me but reside in a metaphysical realm. Are you familiar with this idea that there are many different components to the neshama in a chain that goes up and transcends our physical realm? Well, there's either 3 or there's 5. There's different ways of classifying these different components of the soul, but that's not the important part. But what he's saying is that just like there is a counterpart to geographic locations, there's also a counterpart between our souls that are embedded within our bodies and the portions of our souls that are in the metaphysical realm. And if we want to be able to come to create harmony within all of the different parts of our neshama, we can only accomplish that when we are in the land of Eretz Yisrael. And that is where we will be able to arrive at the highest level of spiritual greatness. And that's why, if you just want to take a look at the last 2 paragraphs, Umimotza davar yatsa, from all of this discussion, it turns out, ki ha'eved Yisrael ha'shochein be'eretz Yisrael, asher hi lu'umat eretz ha'elyona, davek b'shorsho. That a Jewish servant of God who is residing in the land of Israel, and remember the land of Israel corresponds to a heavenly realm, that person is attaching himself to the root, to his spiritual root in the metaphysical realm as well. Ki avir Eretz Yisrael kadoshu, because the air itself of the land of Israel is holy. V'yimashech bo derech yeshara eichut shoresh nafsho el nafsho asher b'kirbo. And it creates that necessary conduit to link the upper portions of his soul that reside in the heavenly realm to the lower portions of his soul that reside within his body. Nimtza ki shalem yikarei b'li pirud minei ube. Such a person, therefore, is called a shalem, a complete person, when he is residing in the land of Israel. Mimenu l'shorsho, because he is completely connected from the highest portion of his soul down to the soul that resides within him. Ma she'en kein biyoto b'chutz la'aretz, sha'avir eretz ha'amim tameu mafsik. But that's not true for the Jew who resides in chutz la'aretz, because that person's soul is interrupted. There's an interruption between his higher soul and his lower soul because of the ritual, spiritual impurity that lingers in the air of chutz la'aretz. Ki ezeh haderech yimashech eichut shoresh nafsho asher ba'aretz elyona shelumat hatachtona derech akalaton el tumat avir eretz tmeya el nefesh karev isha shochenita betoch tumata. Basically, he says, it has to take us, the upper soul has to take a circuitous route in order to circumvent all of the tuma that is we are surrounded by in the airspace of chutz la'aretz. And therefore, he says, now we can understand the pasuk. V'navo el ha'inyan, ki halo zeh ma'amaro yitbarach el Avraham avdo. This is what Hashem was telling Avraham. Al ya'aleh al ruchacha, ki mahutcha b'chutz la'aretz, mahutcha be'eretz echati. Don't think, like Avraham might have been wondering, God, if you have a holy task for me, what difference does it make where I am? Wherever I am, I'm the same person, right? Which is a valid point. If I'm here, I'm the same person as I am when I'm in Eretz Yisrael. What difference does it make where I live, as long as I serve you properly, and as long as I live a holy life? Hashem says it doesn't work that way. Ki haloda ki biyotcha b'chutz la'aretz eincha davek im shorshecha ve'eincha be'etzem shalem. He says, because when you live in chutz la'aretz, you're not able to have that complete conduit connection, the complete connection to your upper soul. And you're not complete, you're not spiritually whole. Ki im ki'ilu nifrad k'tzatcha mik'tzatcha. It's as if there are two parts of you that are disconnected from each other when you're in chutz la'aretz. Ki nifrad ata mi'ikarecha v'shorshecha. You're separated from that higher soul that is essentially a part of you. Ach b'lech techa el ha'aretz ata kaholech u'mitchaber el atzmecha v'shorshecha. But when you go to Eretz Yisrael, you're not just connecting to a holy place, you're reconnecting to yourself. And therefore, v'zehu Lech Lecha. Not like Rashi says. Rashi says Lech Lecha means go for yourself. How does the Alshich understand Lech Lecha? Go to yourself. Go to yourself. Shehu ki lecha ula'atzmecha ata holech hu hashoresh hadavek be'elokecha. He says you're going back to your source. You're reconnecting with the other portions of yourself that are in a higher realm. Ki eichutcha mit'aleh u'mitkadesh u'mishtalem bazeh. Your very inherent essence is elevated and sanctified and completed through your sojourn in Eretz Yisrael. Hinei ki ein atzmutcha b'chutz la'aretz ka'atzmutcha ba'aretz. And therefore, your very being is different when you're in chutz la'aretz from when you're in Eretz Yisrael. I just wanted to show you those words. Lech Lecha doesn't mean just go for yourself, it means go to yourself. So we should be thinking of these ideas when we have these thoughts about making our pilgrimages and our aliyah to Eretz Yisrael. It's a place to go back to find yourself. Yes?
I wanted to ask, what about the great tzaddikim who lived in chutz la'aretz?
Of course. A person, according to what the Alshich is saying, they were never spiritually whole. Even the greatest of tzaddikim reached whatever they could possibly reach in chutz la'aretz, but they weren't successful in being able to properly connect to that highest level that he's describing over here. Now, does that manifest itself in some way? For us puny mortals, it probably, is not really measurable. But this point is that when we are in Galus, we have a role to fulfill, and Hashem wants us to be here. But Hashem is telling Avraham the message that every Jew has to know. When you go to Eretz Yisrael, you go to yourself and you make yourself a complete being. Yes?
What about people who live in Israel but are only Jewish in name?
Well, they're not connecting. They're not connecting at all. Just by living in Eretz Yisrael doesn't automatically mean that you're connected. But it does mean that you're fulfilling a mitzvah constantly, which is a great thing in and of itself. Never be critical of secular Israelis. At least they're fulfilling a great mitzvah. Okay.